how do we start to change the way that we're processing all these things that are happening to us to be able to, to be able to lead at the workplace in our performance, but also at home, because there's sort of different arenas, if you will, right?
Yeah, leadership has never been more important. And especially the younger generation, they want you to get to know them. They expect you to be emotionally intelligent versus maybe, at least when I was younger, it was more prescriptive. Leadership was more prescriptive. Here's what I want you to do because it's going to work for you. Versus now it's more inclusive in terms of, engaging with the, with the athletes or, with your family members or others and saying, hey, what are you thinking? Or how are you feeling? And making it more of a team approach. And so that's definitely the way things are going in the workplace and in the sports world. I've definitely seen that shift myself in terms of working with coaches. And this is so important because, especially in the work world, what's the saying that people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses. So, you definitely want
for sure.
And then, research also shows that the average American worker, probably for any worker, their engagement level is only about 50% at work. They're kind of disengaged. Maybe they don't feel included. They don't feel there's any ownership on their part. And so having a really good leader that sets the right tone is really everything.
Absolutely. I mean, you opened the book with talking about where to start with leadership. And it's, again, I think might surprise people, this idea of being a good person first. And so, how do our values and being a good person actually enable us to really be good leaders?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we really need to do is, ask ourselves if we're in a leadership position, and it doesn't have to even be a formal leadership position, but would I want to work for me today? Or would I want to, if I'm coaching athletes, would I want to play for me today? And so I think part of being a good person is having everyone's best interest in mind and at heart. And so a lot of that falls under, I guess you would say, servant leadership in terms of, we're all in this together trying to do something special. And I care about you, not just in terms of your production, but who you are as a person. And I'm going to be looking out for you, I have your back. And there's going to be times where I challenge you. There's going to be times I support you. And that's just kind of like also being like a good parent as well. One of my favorite stories from Steve Kerr, who's also featured in the book, is when he took over the job with the Golden State Warriors, he called up all the players and actually went out to go see all of them. And, it's easier to do with a smaller team, like in basketball versus, let's say, in football or other sports.
53 guys.
Exactly. But he ended up going and visiting and, hey, where do you like to go to dinner? What do you like to do away from basketball? Tell me about your family and friends. And I think that really set the right tone that, I'm here to help you reach your goals. I'm not just here to get something from you.
Yeah, it's interesting when we look at, teams like the Spurs, let's say, a few years back when they had Ginobili and Parker and going out to dinners together was sort of often hear that talked about. And of course, over dinner, you talk about family and friends and aspirations and whatnot. When we hear the word culture thrown around so much, and of course, every organization has their own culture and wants to build a culture, but there are sort of very few that really have that ingrained culture. Is it as simple as going out to dinner together, or how can we really start to form some of these bonds that the athletes or the people that are working for us really know that we do have their best interest?
Yeah, one of my favorite examples of what you're talking about comes from Paul Ratcliffe, and he's the head coach for Stanford Cardinal women's soccer, the winningest coach, men or women teams in Stanford history. And he's won 3 national championships, a ton of awards, individual awards and also team awards. And he just has a great attitude about culture. He says it's not Paul Radcliffe's culture, it's Stanford, it's the Stanford Cardinal women's soccer culture. And so one of the ways that he makes sure that it's that way is he'll ask the players, hey, let's write down on a card or talk with each other. What's important to you? Is being competitive important? Is training to the max important to you? What's important to you? And we're going to make sure those are our values together. And, how can we encourage each other to stick to those values and principles and then, maybe even enforce them as well. So I really like that he takes kind of like almost a bottom up approach instead of like, okay, here are my values. You guys got to follow along with what I want versus, hey, what's important to you? And how can we make sure that we live those values?
That's tremendous. And, when we think about different environments in the book, you talk about a lot of different environments, competitive environments like medicine and surgery. And of course, traditionally a lot of male ego, a lot of swearing and potentially throwing of things, which you mentioned in the book.
Mhm.
But you give it through the eye, you talk about it through the eyes of a female surgeon. And so this notion of really trying to find your true self and of course your own leadership style, how much do we blend into a certain environment versus starting to layer in our own self into that. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, it could definitely be tricky because on the one hand, you want to be really authentic and true to yourself. On the other hand, as part of a culture, there's a little bit of give and take. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the chapters features Katrina Furlick, and she's a neurosurgeon and also co-founder of Health Prize Technologies. So she had this kind of career change where she had a startup and wanted to make sure in terms of medicine adherence and so forth. And
Mm-hmm.
she talked about that a lot of the early surgeons that she came across that were women almost felt like they had to act more manly
Mm-hmm.
to fit in. And she said that was kind of off-putting because it's like, it didn't feel authentic to them, but it was understandable that they felt that they had to act that way. So she said, kind of like, not necessarily be too thin-skinned when you're working with males that are like, oh, you must be the nurse, and
Yeah.
even though that obviously doesn't feel good and it's not a nice thing to be considered that, but hey, I could show you that I have a sense of humor. I could show you that I could fit in. And then a lot of those people that maybe would look at her differently because she was a woman would eventually come around. And some of those were from other cultures or other countries. So
Yeah.
she said, make sure that you have a sense of humor and that, if you do a good job, people are going to come around. But she wanted to be, she didn't want to feel like I need to be that pound the desk type of leader, in the operating room. I want to be more cooperative. And so she was able to really find that sweet spot for herself.
Yeah, and she talks about a lot of the different styles, obviously being a surgeon and working under, learning from the leads and of course the different styles that there would be of people who sort of commanded as we would traditionally, whilst others were more inclusive and allowing the younger surgeons to be able to do more within that. We talk about how today there's a bit more inclusivity. I imagine we still need to sort of be true to ourselves and how we would typically lead, or how much are we obviously with our group that are in front of us today. I'm just thinking now of, our young kids at Canada Basketball or some of the younger athletes I have, and how we talked about how they want to be more inclusive. And I guess where's that line between here are some of the things that we need, here are some of the fundamentals that we've got to cover. But to your point, what's important to you and how can we support that?
Yeah, it reminds me of self-disclosure in terms of the counseling work I would do, which is, it's fine to share stuff about yourself as long as you're doing it for the benefit of, of your client. You're not just like trying to unload your own stress
Yeah.
on the client. But so, I think it's important to be authentic, but, as a professional as well. But I think communication is key. I've been a part of a lot of organizations where communication wasn't too good. And so to me, that's the starting point. And all the leaders featured in the Leader's Mind book are great communicators. And it doesn't mean that they have to give all these rah-rah speeches. It's just that they communicate how they're feeling or what they're thinking, or they show an interest in, again, what others are thinking and feeling. One little tip that I like to give to coaches is to ask your players, what do I need to know about you as your coach so I can be the best coach for you? And maybe write that on an index card. And it's amazing how many times coaches said, that sounds so obvious. I can't believe I never thought of that.
Yeah.
And they would get back stuff that would surprise them. Some of it, I expected that from that player, but sometimes it'd be like, wow, that player really wants me to coach him hard. Or, hey, that player really prefers, more positive reinforcement. I thought they were the opposite. So I think that's really important. I also ask athletes to go up to your coaches and say, what do you expect from me, or what can I expect from you? And so have those conversations. A lot of misunderstandings happen when communication isn't there.